Imagine opening your mailbox and finding a gold-embossed wedding invitation from the woman who stole your fiancé. And right beneath the swirling calligraphy were 5 handwritten words, "Come see real happiness, Evelyn." I read it twice, my coffee turning cold. The wedding date was 3 months after the day that was supposed to be mine. Same venue, same flowers, same man. Most people would have burned that invitation, but he didn't. I slipped it back into the envelope, placed it neatly on my counter, and whispered, "Oh, I'll come. And I won't come empty-handed." The late afternoon light bled through my blinds, painting gold lines across the counter where the envelope Saturday. My apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of city life outside. I stared at the card, tracing the edges with my thumb. It was heavy, expensive, exactly what Lydia would choose. My sister had always loved things that glittered even if they didn't last. My name in gold foil almost shimmered like mockery. Evelyn Carter, it read. You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Lydia Carter and Daniel Brooks, my ex-fiancé, my sister. My throat tightened, but no tears came. I had cried enough to fill a river 3 months ago. Now there was only a dry, quiet ache. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat by the window. Seattle rain streaked down the glass, blurring the skyline. I used to love this view. The sound of rain had been comforting when Daniel and I first moved in together. Now it just sounded like static. I picked up the invitation again, reading the embossed details ceremony at St. Helena's Church, followed by a reception at the Fairmont. My venues, the ones I had booked, designed, and paid deposits for before everything fell apart. It wasn't enough that she took the man I loved, she had to take my plans too. My color palette, my flowers, even my string quartet. And then there was that note written in Lydia's perfect cursive. Come see real happiness. I could almost hear her voice, sweet, smug, pretending kindness. Lydia had a way of smiling while she stabbed you in the heart. I took my phone and scrolled through old photos, the engagement dinner, Daniel's grin. As he held my hand, Lydia standing beside me, her arm looped through mine. In that photo we looked close. Sisters. But if you zoomed in, you could see it, the calculation in her eyes. Lydia never wanted what was hers, she wanted what was mine. Our parents used to call her the sunshine of the family. I was the quiet one, the dependable one. The one who built things while Lydia destroyed them for fun. Even as kids, I'd save my allowance for books and she'd borrow it to buy glitter shoes. Dad used to laugh it off. That's just Lydia, he'd say. You know she doesn't mean harm, but she did. She always did. My phone buzzed. It was Rachel, my best friend. You're not going to believe this, she said as soon as I answered. Lydia posted her wedding countdown online. 3 months to go, and guess who's tagged? I didn't need to guess. Let me guess, Daniel Brooks and the ghost of my sanity. Rachel exhaled. Eve, I swear that woman has no shame. Please tell me you're not thinking of going. I looked at the invitation again, the shimmer of gold reflecting in my coffee. Oh, I'm going, I said softly. But not for her. There was a pause. What does that mean? Rachel asked. It means I'm done being the quiet one. After the call, I walked to my bookshelf and reached for the old wooden box on the top shelf. It had belonged to my father, Edward Langford, the man who raised Lydia and me after Mom left. He'd been gone for years now, but I could still hear his voice in the back of my mind. Never let a lie define your life, Evelyn. At his funeral, Lydia had cried the loudest, though she hadn't spoken to him for months before he died. She'd called him too strict, too cold. I'd thought she was exaggerating, but now, maybe he'd seen something in her that I refused to see. The box creaked open, revealing the few things I'd kept: an old fountain pen, a folded photograph of Dad and me at the lake, and a small stack of documents. My birth certificate, his medical file, and something else, a folded sheet of paper labeled Langford Estate. I hadn't looked at it in years. Dad's last words to me had been, "The truth always comes out, even if it takes generations." At the time, I thought he meant Lydia's lies. But now, with that invitation gleaming on my counter, the words felt heavier. I placed the papers aside and went to the kitchen. The clock read 7:43. The air smelled faintly of rain and coffee grounds. On the fridge there was still a photo magnet from 2 years ago, Daniel and me on the Oregon coast. His arm was around my waist, our smiles real. I'd believed he was my future. But the thing about betrayal, it doesn't happen overnight. It's built brick by brick, lie by lie, until one day you realize the foundation was rotting the whole time. Lydia's handwriting on that invitation wasn't just a taunt, it was a confession. She wanted me to see her win, but there was something else she didn't know. Something I'd been ignoring for years. Daniel and Lydia, there had always been an uncanny resemblance between them. The same honey-colored eyes, the same crooked smile, even a small scar near the right wrist. Once, Daniel had joked that maybe they were secret cousins. I'd laughed it off. But when I looked back at that moment, now a chill ran through me. What if it wasn't a joke? My father had always been vague about his past, especially during the years before he met my mother. He'd been in Boston, then same city where Daniel's parents lived. I dismissed the thought before it was too wild, too impossible, but now with that wedding looming, I couldn't shake it. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under streetlights. I pulled the invitation closer and stared at Lydia's neat signature. Love, always Lydia and Daniel. I could almost hear Dad's voice again, the firmness beneath his kindness. Truth doesn't hide forever, Evelyn. It waits for the right moment. Maybe that moment had finally come. I opened my laptop and searched my old emails, typing in Daniel's name. Dozens popped up: invoices, designs, travel itineraries. But one caught my eye, an old thread between him and Lydia, labeled Family Research. I clicked. It was dated nearly a year before our engagement. The email mentioned a genealogy service, DNA testing for heritage verification. My pulse quickened. Why would Daniel and Lydia be taking DNA tests together? The message ended with Daniel writing, "Don't tell Evelyn yet. She worries too much." I sat back, the room spinning slowly around me. The truth was closer than I'd ever imagined. I printed the email and folded it carefully into the wooden box. My reflection stared back from the darkened window, tired eyes, tight jaw, the calm before something inevitable. Lydia thought I was broken, that she had taken everything from me. But she'd only cleared the stage for my return. I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the city outside. The invitation lay beside the box, "Two lies waiting to be burned or exposed. Come see real happiness," Lydia had written. I smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Fine, little sister," I whispered. "I'll come. But I'll bring real truth." Long before Lydia stole my fiancé, she'd already stolen pieces of my life, one small betrayal at a time. That thought came to me one rainy morning as I watched the city drip in slow motion through my kitchen window. The same kind of rain had fallen on us when we were kids in Portland. The same gray sky, the same silence that filled our house between my parents' arguments. Back then, I believed silence meant peace. I didn't understand it was just another form of control. Our childhood home sat on the edge of an old neighborhood with elm trees that creaked when the wind blew. My father, Edward Langford, was an architect with ink-stained hands and a perfectionist's temper. My mother, Susan, was the opposite, always polished, always smiling for others, even when her eyes looked exhausted. And then there was Lydia, the golden child. She was born 2 years after me, but seemed to arrive with her own spotlight. She had Dad's dimples, Mom's charm, and a way of turning every mistake into a story that made people laugh instead of judge. I was the quiet one, the thinker, the girl who stayed up late sketching blueprints while the rest of the house slept. I still remember the morning of Lydia's 16th birthday. Dad had been saving to fix the roof, but instead he pulled into the driveway with a white BMW wrapped in a red bow. "It's a family investment," Mom said proudly when I asked why. "Lydia will need transportation for school activities." I had turned 18 that year, old enough for college, but I took the city bus every morning, rain or shine. Dad's only explanation was, "You're responsible enough to manage without one." Lydia squealed, hugging him like she'd just won a lottery while I stood on the porch, with my acceptance letter to Oregon State still sealed in my pocket. It went on like that. Every win of mine became Lydia's comparison. When I got straight A's, Mom said, "You make her feel bad, Evelyn. Don't brag so much." When Lydia barely passed a class, she got a cake because at least she tried. If I was serious, I was cold. If Lydia was reckless, she was spirited. Dad used to sigh and tell me, "You can't change people. Just build your own foundation." So that's what I did. I built. I studied architecture like he had spent hours drafting lines so clean they could cut glass. Lydia was busy collecting admirers online, her face glowing on every screen in the house. By the time we were teenagers, I had stopped competing. It wasn't worth it, but Lydia never stopped taking. When I started dating Eric Morrison, the boy who lived 2 streets over, she suddenly joined the track team where he was captain. A week later, she showed up at my room crying. "He kissed me," she said, sobbing like she was the victim. I told him to stop, but he didn't listen. I broke up with Eric that night and got grounded for being dramatic. 2 weeks later, I found them holding hands behind the gym. Lydia swore it was just a misunderstanding. Mom called it a lesson in forgiveness. I called it the first crack in our family foundation. The second crack came 2 years later when I applied for the summer architecture scholarship at the Preston Institute. I'd worked 3 years for it, volunteering weekends, building houses for low-income families, perfecting my portfolio. The day before the interview, my portfolio vanished. 3 days later, Lydia found it under her bed, water-damaged and ruined. She told Dad she'd accidentally spilled juice on it while cleaning her room. He yelled at her for an hour, but Mom smoothed it over, saying, "It's not worth ruining their relationship." That summer, Lydia used my designs to enter a local contest for youth creativity. She won. I didn't even bother saying anything. I had learned the rule Lydia took. I endured. Years passed. I graduated college while Lydia dropped out of hers halfway through, saying she wanted to build a brand. She became an influencer before the word had weight, posting pictures of her dream life while borrowing money from Mom for rent. Meanwhile, I joined Langford Design Studio, the firm my father had founded from nothing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home, dusty models, pencil sketches, the smell of paper, and ambition. After Dad died, I poured everything into keeping it alive. Lydia reappeared at the funeral in a black designer dress, live streaming a tribute to my hero. She filmed the flowers, the speeches, even the casket. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. That was the first time I felt something shift inside me, a realization that silence could kill you slowly. Months later, Mom appointed Lydia as head of communications for the company, a role invented just for her. "She'll handle PR, you'll handle the architecture," she said. I told her Lydia didn't have experience. "She has charm," Mom replied. And charm was currency. Lydia posted photos from our office, claiming credit for designs she didn't make. I stayed in the background fixing her mistakes. It was easier that way, or so I told myself. Then one autumn afternoon, 3 years ago, Daniel Brooks walked into our office. He was a structural engineer working on a city restoration project. He was confident but kind, with the sort of focus that reminded me of my father. We spent weeks discussing designs, long nights over coffee. He admired my precision. I admired his optimism. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Lydia called him boring the first time they met, then immediately added him on social media. "He's like a math version of you," she joked. "You two are perfect." Back then, I believed her. Daniel and I fell in love, the slow, steady way architects build cathedrals, one line, one promise, one dream at a time. When he proposed 2 years later in the courtyard of a restored Victorian building we'd designed together, it felt like life was finally aligning. Mom cried Dad would have been proud, and Lydia smiled a little too wide. "I'm so happy for you," she said, hugging me. "You deserve it." I didn't notice the way her eyes lingered on the ring. At our engagement dinner, Lydia insisted on making a toast. To Evelyn, she said, her voice honey-sweet, and the man who finally made her smile. Everyone clapped. Later that night, I caught her outside with Daniel laughing too hard at something he said. I brushed it off. She flirted with everyone. That's just Lydia. Except she stopped flirting with everyone else and started showing up wherever we were. At dinner, at the office, at the gallery. I'm just helping with the wedding, she'd say. And Mom would beam with pride. Look how close you two are. I remember one afternoon Daniel mentioned he'd lived in Boston years ago. Lydia's fork froze midair. What part of Boston? She asked quickly. Cambridge, he said. My dad used to have an office there. She forced a smile and changed the subject. But something about the moment stuck with me. The flicker in her eyes, the way Mom's expression shifted for half a second. When I asked later, Mom brushed it off. You're seeing things. Maybe I was. Or maybe I was finally starting to see clearly. It's strange looking back now how every betrayal felt small when it happened. A car, a scholarship, a boyfriend, a credit she didn't earn. Each seemed survivable on its own, but together they formed a pattern, a blueprint for destruction. And every time I forgave her, I handed her another piece of me. By the time Daniel entered my life, there was barely anything left unclaimed. I thought love could fill the space Lydia had carved out. I didn't know she was already reaching for it. That night, after staring at the invitation for hours, I opened an old photo album from our childhood. The pictures told the same story I'd been trying to forget, me holding trophies, Lydia holding me. Me in the background, Lydia in the light. Dad always on my side, Mom always on hers. Maybe that was the balance they needed to survive. But it had cost me everything. I closed the album and glanced at the wooden box still sitting on the table. The documents inside suddenly felt heavier, as if they contained more than paper, maybe the truth. My father never spoke aloud. The next morning I would begin to read. But that night, I whispered to the empty room. Maybe being the mature one means knowing when to stop forgiving. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the city washed clean. I envied it, because I knew deep down nothing about my life would ever be clean again. Some betrayals you feel in your bones before you see them. That night mine arrived as a text message not meant for me. I was working late at the Langford Design Studio, my eyes burning from hours of sketching floor plans under the sterile glow of the drafting lamp, when my phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Lydia popped up. He's not home yet. For a moment I stared at it confused. Then another bubble appeared. Tell him to call me when he leaves. Don't want to fall asleep waiting. My chest tightened. My fingers hovered over the screen, frozen in place. The words didn't belong to me, yet they cut straight through me. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The rain started around 10, a light tapping against the office windows. I tried to focus on my drawings, but every pencil stroke looked crooked. Daniel had texted earlier saying he had a late meeting with a client about the civic restoration project downtown. He was supposed to be home by now. I told myself Lydia's message had to be a mistake. Maybe she'd meant to text someone else. Maybe he wasn't Daniel. But as I picked up my phone again, another notification appeared, a photo. Lydia in a red silk dress, her hair curled, holding a wine glass, with a caption that read, "Hope he likes this." The bottom fell out of my stomach. I closed my laptop and sat back, staring at the ceiling. The silence was suffocating. My reflection in the window looked unfamiliar, like someone caught halfway between denial and truth. My rational brain screamed for logic, there had to be an explanation, but something older, deeper, whispered what I already knew. Lydia's handwriting on that invitation, the smug tone in her voice at dinner, all of it had been leading here. At 11 I grabbed my coat. The city outside was wet and shining, every puddle reflecting neon from the storefronts. I told myself I just needed to return a file to Daniel's office, that it wasn't suspicion, it was practicality. My car moved through the slick streets like it had its own mind. When I reached his building, the parking lot was almost empty. A single light glowed in his second-floor office window. I could see movement inside, two shadows crossing. I stepped out into the rain, The air was cold, sharp against my lungs. My heels clicked on the wet pavement, each sound echoing in the empty lot. As I got closer, laughter drifted through the glass, soft, private, familiar. Lydia's laugh. I moved to the side window, the one where the blinds never quite closed. Through the narrow gap, I saw her perched on Daniel's desk. Her legs crossed the hem of that same red dress, brushing against his knees. He was standing between her legs, leaning in close, smiling like a man in love. Or a man who thought no one would ever catch him. Something inside me broke with terrifying quiet. There were no screams, no tears, just the sound of my heartbeat, slow and steady, as if waiting for permission to speed up. I watched long enough to see his hand slide to her waist, long enough to see her tilt her head, lips parting, before I turned and walked back into the rain. The drive home was a blur of wipers and headlights. My hands shook on the steering wheel. At one point, I pulled over just to breathe. I thought about calling Rachel, but what could I say? My sister is sleeping with my fiancé. It sounded too cruel to be real, even though it was. By the time I reached the apartment, I was numb. The key slipped once before it turned in the lock. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it: candles on the dining table, blueprints on the counter, Daniel's jacket over the chair. The smell of him lingered in the air. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch watching the clock hands crawl past 2, 3, 4. The rain finally stopped, leaving the city eerily still. Around dawn, I heard the door open. Daniel stepped in, his hair damp, his expression carefully neutral. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I answered. My voice didn't sound like mine. He poured himself coffee, avoiding my eyes. "The meeting went late. I didn't want to wake you." "Was it productive?" I asked. He nodded. "Very." I slid my phone across the table toward him. The screen lit up with Lydia's message, the one that wasn't meant for me. He froze. "It's not what you think," he said quickly. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Then tell me what I think." He looked down, exhaled, tried to find words. "Lydia's been confused. She came on to me. I told her it was inappropriate. And then you kissed her to prove your point." His face twisted. "Evelyn, please, it wasn't serious. I didn't want to hurt her." The laugh that escaped me was sharp enough to sting. "You didn't want to hurt her," I repeated, tasting the bitterness in every word. "And what about me?" "I made a mistake," he said. "A stupid, meaningless mistake." I stood up. "A meaningless mistake that destroyed 2 people in one night." He reached for me, but I stepped back. My engagement ring glinted under the kitchen light, an emblem of everything false between us. I slipped it off and placed it on the counter. "Consider the mistake corrected," I said, and walked out. By morning, everyone knew. Word travels fast in a family that thrives on appearances. My phone buzzed, nonstop calls from Mom, messages from Lydia, then from friends who just wanted to check in. I ignored them all until Mom showed up at my door. She didn't hug me. She didn't even sit down. "I heard about what happened," she said, her tone already defensive. "Lydia's distraught. She said it was an accident." "An accident?" I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "You've always been dramatic, Evelyn," she sighed. "You work too much. You probably neglected him." I stared at her, stunned by the familiarity of the script. He cheated on me with my sister. Mom folded her arms. "You're not perfect either. You can be cold, distant. Men need warmth." Something hot flared in my chest, but I swallowed it. There was no point arguing. Mom didn't believe in sides. She believed in keeping the family picture untorn, no matter how fake the smiles. "Get some rest," she said softly, as if I were the one who'd sinned. Then she left, closing the door with finality. That afternoon, Lydia posted a photo on social media, her head on Daniel's shoulder, the caption reading, "Sometimes love finds you where you least expect it." Hundreds of likes, hearts, and comments flooded in. "You two are perfect. So happy for you. True love wins." I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. Not one person asked what had happened to me. Not one person saw the cruelty behind the smile. The humiliation was total. At work, whispers followed me down the hall. I heard my name attached to words like jealous and unstable. Richard, my supervisor, called me into his office. Maybe you should take some time off, he suggested, avoiding my eyes. Just until things calm down. The words felt rehearsed. They always did when men were uncomfortable with women's pain. By the end of the week, I'd lost my project, a 2-year development I'd led from the ground up. Lydia was now appearing in company promo photos, posing in the office like she'd earned her place. It was as if the scandal had erased me completely. One night, as I packed my things into boxes, I found a sealed envelope on Daniel's desk, a receipt from Helix Genetics, the same lab listed in my father's old documents. My breath caught. The name on the form, Daniel Brooks, a blood analysis. Date 4 months before our engagement. I didn't know what it meant yet, but the same chill that had crawled up my spine outside his office returned full force. I slipped the envelope into my bag. In the taxi ride home, I watched the city lights smear into color through the rain. The driver asked if I was all right. I nodded, unable to answer. My mind was spinning every betrayal, every warning I'd ignored, flashing through my memory like lightning. When I reached my apartment, I placed the envelope beside my father's wooden box. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stood there for a long moment, staring at both. Daniel's secret, my father's, my sister's lies. They were all connected, somehow tangled, like old blueprints no one wanted to unfold. I whispered to the darkness he lied about everything. Then, after a pause, quieter still, but maybe not about who he really is. The words tasted like prophecy. I didn't know it then, but that single sentence would lead me straight into the truth and the revenge waiting beneath it. When betrayal becomes gossip, it's no longer pain, it's spectacle. The Monday after everything fell apart, I walked into Langford Design Studio and felt 200 eyes flicker away the moment I stepped inside. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, keyboards clattered louder than usual, and someone coughed just to fill the silence. I'd spent 7 years in that building designing, leading, building trust. Now I was the scandal everyone whispered about. The receptionist Marcy wouldn't meet my eyes when she handed me my mail. "Richard wants to see you," she mumbled. Her tone carried pity, which somehow hurt worse than mockery. As I passed through the glass hallway, I caught fragments of conversations. Daniel's name, Lydia's name, mine. One intern murmured, "Did you see the post? She actually wore white?" I pretended not to hear. Richard's office door was half open. He stood by the window staring down at the rain-slick street below, arms crossed. "Evelyn," he said, not turning around. "We need to talk." I sat down, waiting for the script I knew was coming. "There's been a lot of attention lately," he began. "The board's concerned about the company's reputation. Clients are asking questions. You understand how this looks." "How it looks," I repeated. "I didn't make a scene. I didn't post anything. I didn't do a thing except get betrayed by 2 people I trusted." He sighed, still not meeting my eyes. "Sometimes perception matters more than truth. Maybe you should take a few weeks off, let things cool down." "Let things cool down," I said softly. "You mean disappear?" He didn't answer. The silence was confirmation enough. When I stepped out of his office, Lydia was walking down the corridor in a new white blazer and heels. Her hair was styled, her makeup immaculate, as if she hadn't just detonated my life. "Eve," she said too brightly, "I didn't know you were coming in today." "Neither did I replied. She gave me a sympathetic tilt of her head. "It's for the best, you know. We all need time to heal." I wanted to ask how she could say we when she was the one smiling in photographs with my ring still on her finger. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled faintly. "You heal your way, Lydia. I'll heal mine." Her smile faltered just for a second, and it was enough to keep me standing. By Wednesday, the headlines started. Langford sisters caught in love triangle scandal. Architect's fiancé leaves for her influencer sister. A business blog called it a PR nightmare for the Langford legacy. Lydia posted a carefully worded statement, "Love doesn't follow rules. Sometimes hearts change." It had a photo of her and Daniel at the same cafe we used to go to every Friday. The caption read number New Beginnings. My inbox filled with meeting cancellations. Clients who'd praised my work last month suddenly had budget adjustments. One even said, "It's just not the right time to associate with controversy." Controversy. That was their word for betrayal now. By Thursday, my access card stopped working. HR sent a polite email about temporary leave pending review. The same day, Lydia posted a photo from the office terrace with the caption, "Back to work, exciting new projects ahead." I stared at it until the screen blurred. She'd even tagged the company I'd built my career on. I should have felt rage, but all I felt was a deep, bone-deep exhaustion, like grief that had calcified into silence. That evening, Mom called. Her tone was tight formal. "Evelyn, we need to talk. I'm not in the mood. It's about Lydia's wedding," she said quickly. "She's asked me to make sure there won't be any unpleasantness. You're still planning to attend, right?" "Why would I?" "Because it's important for the family." She snapped. "The Thompsons are attending Daniel's family. They're potential investors in the company. It's crucial that we maintain harmony." Harmony. The word almost made me laugh. "She's marrying my ex-fiancé," I said. "The same man who cheated on me. And you want me to sit there smiling for the cameras?" Mom's voice went cold. "You've always been so self-centered, Evelyn. This isn't about you anymore. It's about what's best for Langford Design. Your father worked too hard to let your temper ruin everything." My temper. That's what she called it when I refused to be humiliated quietly. "Maybe if you'd protected the company half as much as you protect Lydia's image," I said, "we wouldn't be one bad headline away from bankruptcy." There was silence on the line. Then a sharp intake of breath. "What do you know about that?" "Enough," I said, and hung up. That night I scrolled through social media until my phone felt heavy in my hand. Lydia's followers called her brave, romantic, misunderstood. The internet loved a redemption story, and she'd written herself as the heroine. No one cared about the sister she'd gutted to get there. My name only appeared in the comments as a shadow. The jealous ex. The bitter one. When the tears finally came, they weren't for Daniel or Lydia or even the company. They were for the years I'd spent trying to earn love that was always conditional. I cried until the city outside turned quiet, until my eyes burned and my chest felt hollow. By Friday morning, I stopped answering the phone. The emails piled up unopened. I shut the curtains, made coffee, and sat at the table with the wooden box my father had left me. I ran my fingers over its carved edges, wondering if he'd somehow known this storm was coming. He'd built a company, a family, and tried to pass down strength. Maybe this box was his way of saying, "You'll need more than strength, you'll need truth." A knock on the door jolted me. When I opened it, Mom stood there in her tailored coat, the same one she wore to board meetings. Her hair was perfect, her perfume expensive, her expression furious. "You need to stop," she said. "Stop with this performance. You're making everyone uncomfortable." "Everyone?" I asked. "Or just you?" She brushed past me, stepping into my apartment like she owned it. "Your father built Langford Design from nothing. Lydia's wedding is our chance to secure investors. The Thompsons trust Daniel. We can't afford to lose this deal because you're hurt." I stared at her, barely breathing. "Because I'm hurt," I repeated slowly. "Do you hear yourself? You're exaggerating. You've always taken things too seriously. Lydia didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't mean to fall into my fiancé's bed. Watch your tone." "No," I said. "You watch yours." For the first time, she looked uncertain. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her checkbook. "How much will it take for you to stay away from the wedding?" I froze. "You're trying to buy me off." Her pen hovered above the paper. 5,000. 10. You can take a trip, clear your head. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The anger hit me like heat from a furnace, but my voice stayed calm. "Keep your money," I said. "You're going to need it." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Ask Dad about the loans he took against the company. Ask him about the contracts falling through. Or better yet, ask yourself why I know and you don't." Her face went pale. "How do you know that I opened the door?" "Goodbye, Mom." She hesitated, then left, heels clicking down the hallway. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt lighter. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I turned back to the box. Beneath the letters and sketches was a thick envelope I hadn't noticed before, sealed with wax and labeled in my father's handwriting to Evelyn, not before the right time. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. The wax cracked easily, revealing a folded letter and a stack of documents. The letter began, simply, "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, the time has come." I read the first few lines, my heart pounding faster with each one. He wrote about the company's ownership, about trusts, and silent partners, about protection clauses tied to morality and marriage. Words like inheritance, moral clause, sealed will. He ended with a line that made my throat tighten. "Truth always finds its way home, even if it has to wait for you to open the door." The papers beneath his letter were thick legal documents with embossed seals. I didn't understand all of them yet, but one thing was clear: my father had left more than memories. He'd left leverage. Outside, the city lights flickered to life against the evening sky. I sat at the table, the documents spread before me, and felt the first spark of something I hadn't felt since before Lydia's betrayal. Not anger, not grief. Power. And for the first time since this began, I whispered to the empty room, "Maybe this isn't the end after all." My father had been gone for years, yet his voice was in that envelope, steady, patient, waiting for me to be ready. I sat at the kitchen table, long past midnight, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. The air felt different, charged as if he were there in the room, watching to see what I would do next. The wax seal cracked with a soft sigh, and the faint smell of cedar and paper drifted up, the scent of his old study. The handwriting was his, sharp and deliberate. "My dearest Evelyn," it began, "if you're reading this, it means the time I feared has come. You may think what I built has crumbled, but you are wrong. What matters most is not lost. It's simply hidden, waiting for you to uncover it." I could almost hear his voice, calm and firm, the same tone he used when teaching me to measure twice before cutting. The letter went on to describe the company, the family, the mistakes he'd made trusting the wrong people. He wrote of my mother's obsession with appearances, of Lydia's growing influence, and how both could destroy the legacy he'd spent decades protecting. He mentioned a name, Charles Whitmore. "He is the only person who knows where everything truly stands," my father wrote. "Trust him. He holds the sealed will and the records you'll need when the truth begins to unravel. The company, the estate, even the patents, they belong to you, provided you meet the conditions I have set." My pulse quickened. Conditions. I read the next line twice to be sure. "The heir must be of sound character, financially independent, and free of entanglements that could corrupt judgment, especially those bound by blood or deceit." I felt the air drain from the room. It was as if he already knew what Lydia and Daniel were capable of. The letter ended simply, "Truth must come to light when you can carry it, not before. You have your mother's grace, but my spine. Use both, Edward." Tears blurred the ink. I hadn't cried at his funeral, but now the dam broke quietly. I whispered, "I miss you, Dad," to the empty air, and for the first time I felt him answer through those words. "You're stronger than you think." By dawn, I was dressed and driving through Portland's gray streets, the envelope on the passenger seat beside me. Whitmore and Kane law offices stood in an old brick building near the waterfront, the kind with brass plaques and frosted glass doors. Inside, everything smelled faintly of leather and dust. An elderly receptionist looked up from her desk. "Do you have an appointment, miss?" she asked. "Tell Mr. Whitmore that Edward Langford's daughter is here," I said. Her expression shifted just slightly, as though she recognized the name. One moment. Minutes later, a tall man with silver hair appeared in the doorway, walking with the steady confidence of someone who'd seen too many secrets to be surprised by any new ones. "Evelyn Langford," he said with a faint smile. "You have your father's eyes." He led me into an office filled with heavy books and sunlight. Old architectural blueprints hung framed on the wall, some bearing my father's signature. The sight tightened something in my chest. He told me you'd come when the time was right, Whitmore said, taking a seat behind a mahogany desk. He said you wouldn't come for money, you'd come for truth. I handed him the letter. He read in silence, nodding slowly, then unlocked a drawer and pulled out a large sealed envelope with a red wax insignia. Your father left this with me 10 years ago, he explained. He insisted it remain sealed for either 6 years after his death or until you faced what he called a betrayal from within the family. I laughed softly, though it didn't sound like humor. Well, that box is checked. He slid the envelope toward me. Inside is the legal documentation of the Langford estate. Your father restructured everything before he passed. The official company ownership records your mother has are incomplete. What you'll find here is the truth. My hands were steady as I broke the seal. Inside were deeds, trust agreements, patent documents, even blueprints, with notations in my father's handwriting. At the top was a valuation summary, Langford Design Holdings estimated value, $8.4 million. My breath caught. He hid all this. He didn't hide it, Whitmore corrected gently. He safeguarded it. He saw what was happening. He worried that your mother's decisions and your sister's influence would ruin the company. So he set up silent trusts. Everything leads back to you, but only under certain conditions. What conditions? Whitmore adjusted his glasses and opened a smaller folder. The heir must be unmarried or married to someone vetted by the Langford Board of Ethics. They must not have outstanding debts, criminal records, or questionable associations. He hesitated. And there's one more clause: no inheritance can pass to anyone engaged in a relationship that would constitute a direct blood relation. That clause was his last addition before signing. I stared at him. Blood relation, he nodded gravely. Your father was meticulous. He even had preliminary DNA profiles done within the family. Routine, he said. Preventive. He slid a page toward me. My name was at the top, followed by Lydia's and my mother's. At the bottom was a reference number and a note: additional profile, Brooks Daniel, possible relation under review. The name looked like it was glowing through the paper. Daniel Brooks, I whispered. Whitmore looked up. Do you know him? Yes, I said slowly. I was supposed to marry him. For a moment the room went completely silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Whitmore's eyes softened. Then I think you already understand why your father was so careful. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, heavy with implication. I pressed my fingers against my temples. You're telling me my father thought Daniel might be what his son? Whitmore folded his hands. He never confirmed it, but he suspected. Your father worked in Boston in the late 80s, around the same time Daniel's birth records list his father as unknown. Edward believed the truth might one day matter, so he asked the lab to archive the results under seal. I shook my head. No, this is insane. But even as I said it, pieces began sliding into place. Their similar eyes, their easy connection, my mother's strange silence that night at dinner. My stomach turned. Whitmore's voice was gentle. The full DNA file is still in Helix Genetics archives. Your father arranged for me to access it only if you requested. But Evelyn, if the results confirm his suspicion, then Lydia and Daniel's marriage would not only void their inheritance, it would be illegal. Illegal. The word rang in my ears like a bell. I stood up, pacing the room. My reflection in the glass cabinet looked unfamiliar, eyes wide, jaw clenched. He knew, I murmured. Dad knew they'd destroy each other, and he built a trap out of his will. He built protection, Whitmore corrected. For you, for the company, for his name. I turned toward him. Then I need that file. Everything. DNA records, whatever he left. Whitmore hesitated. Evelyn, this will cause chaos. Are you sure you want to open that door? I didn't start this war, I said, my voice steady now. But I'll finish it. He regarded me for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. I'll contact Helix Genetics. It may take a few days to retrieve the full archive. When I left his office, the rain had stopped. The air outside felt strangely clear, almost sharp. I walked to my car with the envelope clutched to my chest, the weight of my father's legacy pressing against my ribs. At home, I spread the papers across the table. The numbers, the dates, the names, they all formed a pattern. At the bottom of one page was a line that sent a chill through me. Relation positive match paternal link confirmed. My breath hitched. The additional profile wasn't labeled, but it didn't need to be. I knew. Daniel Brooks wasn't just my ex-fiancé. He was my half-brother. For a moment, the world tilted. The room spun, the edges of my vision flickering with disbelief. I clutched the edge of the table until my knuckles went white. I thought of Lydia's wedding invitation, her perfect handwriting, that smug note, "Come see real happiness." A laugh broke from my throat, low and hollow. "You have no idea what's coming," I whispered. I gathered the documents, carefully placed them back in the wooden box, and locked it tight. Then I picked up the phone and called Whitmore. "I need that DNA record officially certified," I said. He paused. "When do you plan to use it?" "At the wedding," I answered. Silence on the other end. "Then your father would be proud of your precision." "Maybe," I said softly. "But I'm not doing this for pride. I'm doing it for justice." When I hung up, I looked at the clock. It was nearly 2 in the morning. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at my reflection in the window. The woman looking back wasn't broken anymore. She was patient, calculating, ready. And for the first time, I realized that the truth could be sharper than any blade, and I was finally ready to wield it. Truth has a pulse. Once you decide to find it, it beats louder than fear. That thought echoed in my head as I sat in my car outside Helix Genetics, the rain slicing down the windshield in steady, deliberate lines. The sign above the glass doors glowed faintly blue in the darkness, sterile and unwelcoming. I held the sealed envelope from Whitmore on my lap like a heartbeat, and next to it, inside a Ziploc bag, was a single strand of Lydia's blonde hair I'd plucked from her coat when we met for coffee. I shouldn't have been shaking, but I was. Every step of this investigation felt like trespassing, even though I had the need to know. My father's letter had turned my life upside down, but it had also given me clarity. If Daniel and Lydia were truly connected by blood, then the wedding wasn't just immoral, it was a crime. Inside the lab was quiet humming with low fluorescent light. A woman at the reception desk looked up. "Can I help you?" she asked. I showed her Whitmore's letter of authorization and my ID. "I'm here for Dr. Patel," I said. She nodded, typing quickly. "He's expecting you." Second floor, end of the hall. Dr. Patel's office smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. He was older than I'd imagined, with warm brown eyes and silver streaks in his beard. "Miss Langford," he said, shaking my hand. "I knew your father well. He was one of the few clients who read the entire consent form before signing it." "That sounds like him," I said quietly. He gestured for me to sit. "Charles told me you've uncovered sensitive information. I have access to the archived profiles your father requested we preserve. I can compare them to any new samples you provide. Do you have something we can test?" I handed him the sealed bag with Lydia's hair. My hand brushed his for a moment, and I realized how cold my fingers were. He examined the sample carefully. "This will work. I'll also need a second reference, something belonging to Daniel Brooks." "I'll get it," I said. He leaned back in his chair. "You understand what this means, Miss Langford. If the results confirm a paternal match, it won't just be a personal revelation. It will be legal evidence. It could change the entire inheritance structure of your family's estate." "I understand," I said. "That's exactly why I need proof." That night I drove to Daniel's old office. It was nearly midnight when I pulled into the empty parking lot. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that mirrored the streetlights. The security guard barely glanced up when I walked in. "Forgot something," I said with a tired smile. "I used to work with Daniel Brooks." He nodded, uninterested. "Go ahead." Daniel's desk was still half-empty, drawers open, as if he'd left in a hurry. I found what I needed in the bottom drawer, a coffee mug with his name etched on the side, the rim faintly smudged. I added his old toothbrush from the cabinet near the sink, both sealed carefully in plastic. My heart pounded the entire time. I wasn't stealing, I was collecting evidence. Outside, I paused beside my car and looked up at the building's dark windows. I could almost see us there. Me and Daniel laughing over blueprints, dreaming of a future that no longer existed. The memory stung, but it also hardened me. Love had been the foundation of my blindness. The truth would be my blueprint for revenge. 2 days later, Dr. Patel called. "We've run the preliminary analysis," he said. "Can you come in?" I met him in his office that afternoon. He didn't waste time with small talk. He simply pushed a folder across the desk. "You might want to sit down," he said. The report was clinical detached, written in the neutral tone scientists use when they know their findings will shatter lives. Genetic relation, 99.8% match. Conclusion, shared paternal DNA. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My body went still, every muscle locking into place. The words on the page blurred, as if the ink itself were trembling. "So it's true," I whispered finally. Dr. Patel nodded. "They share the same father, Edward Langford." I pressed a hand over my mouth. My father's name looked alien in that sentence, like it didn't belong there. "He knew," I said. "He must have known." "I believe he suspected," Dr. Patel said softly. "He was a meticulous man. He left us instructions to retain the data indefinitely. Perhaps he hoped it would one day protect you." "Protect me?" The irony almost made me laugh. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the skyline. The rain had started again, faint and steady tapping against the glass. My reflection stared back, pale, composed, unrecognizable. "They can't know yet," I said. "Not until the wedding." Dr. Patel hesitated. "You're planning to reveal it publicly?" "Yes," I said, "at the ceremony. In front of everyone who helped them lie," he sighed. "That's a dangerous path." "Truth usually is," I said. He nodded slowly. "Then you'll need documentation. Official signatures, notarization, multiple witnesses. I'll handle the certification discreetly." I thanked him and left, clutching the folder like it was both a weapon and a wound. That night, I laid everything out on my dining table. The will, the DNA, report, my father's letter, every document Whitmore had given me. The evidence was irrefutable. My father had built a labyrinth of protections, and now every door led to this Lydia marrying her own half-brother. The rain outside became a constant rhythm, a metronome for my thoughts. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and stared at the papers until the words blurred. In some corner of my heart, a small voice whispered that none of this would bring peace, that even justice wouldn't undo what they'd done to me. But another voice, colder, steadier, said peace wasn't the point. The point was truth. The phone rang once. It was Whitmore. "I've been informed by Dr. Patel," he said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, though my voice was quieter than I meant it to be. "I've taken the liberty of contacting 2 members of the Langford Board of Ethics. They'll be present at the wedding." Quietly. "If you choose to proceed, they'll serve as witnesses." "Good," I said. "Make sure they bring copies of the inheritance clause." He paused. "Evelyn, I have to ask, what's your endgame? Justice," I said simply. "And maybe a little bit of peace." When the call ended, I stared at my reflection in the window again. The woman looking back wasn't trembling anymore. Her eyes were sharp, her jaw set. I realized I'd been waiting for this moment my entire life, the chance to stop being the quiet one. I thought of Lydia, her soft laughter, her rehearsed innocence. I thought of Daniel, the way he'd said I didn't want to hurt her while his lies gutted me. I thought of my mother, who believed reputation mattered more than truth. And I thought of my father, who had trusted me to finish what he couldn't. In the end, I whispered the words I'd never said aloud. "You wanted to see real happiness, Lydia. I'll bring it to you, printed, sealed, and signed in DNA." The next morning I visited Whitmore again. He reviewed the certified report, stamped and sealed with the laboratory's insignia. "It's ironclad," he said. "No one can challenge it. The moment it's presented, the marriage is void. Perfect, I replied. As I turned to leave, he added, "You understand this will ruin them completely. Their reputations, their finances, even their ability to recover legally." I met his gaze. "They ruined me first." Outside, the sky was clearing. The storm had passed, but the city still smelled of rain and renewal. I took a deep breath and stepped into the light, the folder tucked safely under my arm. I didn't feel victorious. Not yet, just ready. Ready to let truth speak louder than every lie they'd ever told. Ready to walk into their perfect wedding and tear down their perfect world, one paper, one revelation, one breath at a time. And somewhere beneath all that resolve, I could almost hear my father's voice again, calm and certain. "Patience, my dear. The quiet ones change the world. Revenge, I've learned, isn't a storm. It's a calculation. It doesn't come with lightning or fury, but with a calm, so cold it burns." 2 days before the wedding, I woke up before sunrise and laid every document on the floor: my father's letter, Whitmore's legal notes, Dr. Patel's DNA report, the certified seals, and the clause from the Langford inheritance. Each page gleamed faintly under the morning light, crisp, clean, lethal. I brewed coffee black and bitter and sat cross-legged on the floor, tracing the lines of my father's handwriting with my thumb. The weight of what I was about to do pressed into my bones. I wasn't just exposing a lie. I was rewriting the family's entire foundation. When my phone buzzed, I already knew who it was. Whitmore never called early unless it was urgent. "Everything's ready," he said. "The documentation is sealed and notarized. The board members will arrive discreetly at St. Mary's Hall before the ceremony. Dr. Patel has confirmed he'll attend as a professional witness if needed." "Good," I said. "I'll bring the original report myself." He hesitated. "Evelyn, I have to remind you, once this begins, there's no turning back. The fallout will be irreversible." "Fallout happens when you bury the truth," I replied. "I'm just digging it up." After we hung up, I placed the documents back into the wooden box my father had carved decades ago. It had once held blueprints for the company's first building. Now it held the blueprint for justice. I dressed carefully that morning, a black silk blouse, a beige coat, no makeup. The mirror reflected a version of me I barely recognized, steady, still not angry anymore. Anger was too noisy. This required silence. Downtown Portland was quiet that early, the streets wet from last night's rain. When I reached Whitmore's office, he was already standing by the window with a cup of tea in his hand, looking like a man about to send a ship into a storm he couldn't control. "You're early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," I answered. He motioned toward the table where a new envelope sat, stamped, sealed, official. "These are copies for the court if it comes to that. The originals stay with you. The board will recognize the seal immediately." I picked up the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. "You ever think truth should come with a warning label?" He smiled faintly. "Your father thought so. That's why he left it to you." I nodded once. "Then, let's make sure his plan works." By afternoon, I drove to Dr. Patel's clinic to pick up the authenticated results. He greeted me with the same calm professionalism, but I saw the tension in his jaw. "I've added my signature and certification," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "If anyone questions its legitimacy, they'll have to go through me." "Thank you," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "I've worked in genetics for 30 years, Miss Langford. I've seen DNA destroy families and save lives. What you're doing? It's necessary, but it will hurt." I exhaled slowly. Sometimes truth has to wound before it heals. As I turned to leave, he said quietly, "Your father would have been proud." The words hit harder than I expected. That evening, Rachel came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. The apartment was littered with paper trails and sticky notes, but she didn't comment. She just set the bag down and said, "So this is it, huh? You're really going through with it?" "Yes," I said, pouring wine into 2 glasses. "They wanted a show. I'll give them one." Rachel studied me, her expression torn between awe and worry. "You know, most people would have just blocked them and moved on. Most people didn't lose their father's legacy to liars, I replied. She leaned against the counter. Evelyn, I'm not saying don't do it. I just want to make sure you'll still recognize yourself afterward. I will, I said. That's the point. We ate in near silence. Between bites, she asked, What are you going to wear? The same white dress I bought for my own wedding, I said. She froze mid-chew. You're serious, I smiled slightly. Perfectly. They stole my day. I'm taking it back. Later, after Rachel left, I stood in front of my closet and pulled out the dress. It was still wrapped in the original garment bag, untouched since the night Daniel had proposed. The silk shimmered under the lamplight, pure, unblemished, mercilessly white. I hung it by the window. It glowed like an accusation. That night, sleep refused to come. I sat on my balcony watching the city lights shimmer against the Willamette River. Somewhere across town, Lydia was probably rehearsing her vows, smiling at the mirror, believing the world would bend to her again. She didn't know the world had already shifted beneath her feet. Around midnight, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Evelyn, she said, her voice thin with exhaustion. We're worried about you. I repeated. Your sister told me she's terrified you'll do something impulsive. Please don't embarrass the family any more than you already have. I laughed softly. Embarrass the family? You mean, tell the truth. You don't understand, she hissed. This wedding is our chance to restore the company's image. The Thompsons are influential people. If you ruin this, Mom, I interrupted. Daniel is Dad's son. The silence on the line stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then she whispered, How do you know that? Because I have proof. Her voice trembled. Your father promised he'd destroy those records. He didn't, I said. He left them for me. There was a sharp inhale, then a cold, familiar tone. Do you have any idea what you're doing? You'll destroy all of us. Maybe you should have thought about that before choosing appearances over integrity. Evelyn, if you do this, you'll never be forgiven. Then I guess forgiveness isn't part of the plan, I said and hung up. Afterward, I sat in the dark for a long time, the city's hum vibrating through the windows. My hands were steady, but my heart pounded like a slow drum. My family had built their lives on denial, layer after layer of lies polished to perfection. Tomorrow, all of it would come undone. The next morning, I met Whitmore one last time at the downtown courthouse to have the documents officially logged. The clerk stamped them with the state seal, confirming their authenticity. It was done. As I turned to leave, Whitmore handed me a small envelope. Your father wrote this years ago. He said I should give it to you once you were ready. I opened it in the hallway. Inside was a single line written in my father's neat handwriting. Justice is patient, Evelyn. Be neither cruel nor afraid. By the time I returned home, the apartment felt different, cleaner, lighter, as though the air itself knew what was coming. I laid the white dress on the bed, pressed and flawless beside the wooden box containing every truth my family had buried. I whispered into the stillness. You wanted me quiet, Lydia. You wanted me invisible. But tomorrow you'll hear every word I never said. Then I closed the box, locked it, and placed it beside the dress. The morning light spilled across both like a silent oath. For the first time in months, I slept without dreams. Because I already knew how tomorrow would end, with truth walking down the aisle wearing white. The morning before the wedding was too bright for the kind of day it was. Sunlight spilled through the curtains like an insult, cutting across the apartment floor where the white dress hung ghost-like by the window. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my coffee cup, waiting for the inevitable, the call, the text, the attempt to control me one last time. It came at 9:30. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring once before answering. Evelyn, she said quickly, as if afraid I'd hang up. Your sister wants to meet you. Just to talk. Why? I asked. She says it's important. Please just hear her out. Don't make things worse than they already are. I almost laughed. Worse, Mom, she's marrying my ex-fiancé. I think the damage is done. Her voice softened into that old tone she used when I was a child, and she needed something. You've always been the mature one, Eve. Be gracious for the family. There it was again, that word family wielded like a weapon. Where, I asked finally. Blue Orchid Cafe. 11 sharp. Don't be late. I arrived early. The cafe was small, crowded with the smell of espresso and fresh bread. Lydia was already there, sitting by the window in a cream coat, her blonde hair perfectly curled. Even in daylight, she looked camera-ready, her phone on the table, like another limb. When she saw me, her lips curved into a cautious smile. "You came. You asked," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. For a moment she said nothing. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I know things between us are tense, but I don't want bad blood on my wedding day." "Too late for that." Her smile faltered. "You don't have to come, you know. If it's too painful, I'll manage." She stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the cup. "Daniel and I, what happened with us, it wasn't planned." "You have to believe that." "I don't have to believe anything," I said evenly. She sighed dramatically. "You've always been so cold, Eve. That's why men leave. You make them feel small." The words slid across the table like broken glass, sharp but familiar. "And what do you make them feel, Lydia?" I asked. "Guilty, confused, related." She blinked, frowning. "What's that supposed to mean?" I smiled, just enough to unsettle her. "Nothing. Just an observation." The silence stretched. She shifted in her seat, suddenly unsure. "You're not going to wear something ridiculous tomorrow, are you? I mean, it's my wedding. Please don't make it about you." I stood up, leaving money for my coffee. "Don't worry. I'll wear white. It's a family tradition, right?" The look on her face, confusion curdled into unease, was almost worth everything that had led to this. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house. The old Langford home sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, like a relic from better times. The garden was overgrown, the paint on the porch fading, but inside everything gleamed with obsessive precision. Mom was waiting in the living room, pearls at her throat, eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. "Your father's out back," she said. "He doesn't know you're coming." "Good," I said. "I'm not here for him." She folded her arms. "Evelyn, please. I know you're angry." "Angry," I interrupted. "No, Mom. Angry was months ago. Now I'm just awake." She flinched slightly. "You don't understand how hard this family has worked to survive. The company was failing. We needed Daniel's connection with the Thompsons. It wasn't personal." "Everything's personal when you're the one being sacrificed," I said. Her face hardened. "Your father would be ashamed of how you're behaving." "No," I said quietly. "He'd be ashamed of what you've become." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. I turned to leave, but she caught my arm. "If you go through with whatever it is you're planning, there will be no coming back." I stopped wanting to come back a long time ago. Outside, my father's old car sat in the driveway, its hood covered in dust. I traced my finger along the outline of his initials carved into the steering wheel, a memory from childhood. He'd taught me to drive in that car, his hands steady on the wheel, saying, "Always look ahead, not behind." I understood now. Looking back had only ever blinded me. That evening, Rachel came over again, bringing a garment steamer and her usual nervous humor. "You sure about the white dress?" she asked, eyeing it like it might explode. "Absolutely," I said. "Let them choke on the symbolism." She grinned weakly. "God, you're terrifying. I love it." We worked in silence for a while, smoothing out the wrinkles, pinning the hem. When she finally spoke again, her tone had softened. "You know, this might be the first time you're doing something entirely for yourself." "Maybe," I said. "But it's also for my father, for every time he was silenced." Rachel nodded. "Then make it count." When she left, I stood alone in the living room, the dress hanging from the doorframe, luminous in the lamplight. I opened the wooden box one last time and checked every document, the DNA results, the notarized statement, the clause from the will, the signatures. Everything was perfect. I slipped the folder into my clutch, then wrote a short note for Whitmore. "If I don't call by 2:15, proceed as planned." I sealed it and placed it on the counter. Before bed, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window watching the city lights flicker. Somewhere across town, Lydia was probably rehearsing her vows. I promise to love you, honor you. The words sounded hollow now, the kind of promises built on rot. At midnight, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Eve, he said, his voice strained. We need to talk. Do we? I didn't know, he said. About your father, about any of it. Then you didn't look very hard, I said. He sighed. I made mistakes, but Lydia loves me. I can't just walk away now. Then don't, I said. Walk down that aisle, Daniel. Just make sure you're ready for what's waiting at the end of it. He hesitated. You sound different. I am different, I said, and hung up. The night passed slowly after that. I didn't dream. I didn't need to. I already knew how tomorrow would go, the shock, the silence, the collapse. I could almost hear it. At dawn, I woke before my alarm. The air was cool, the sky